Okay. All right. I will now open the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee workshop. So I'm not sure who you want me to hand it to. First off,
Probably let Taylor and Elena
take the lead
get
on
it
that.
started for the most part, but just wanted to say thank you for being here and thank you for the work that everybody's doing. And this is kind of I like to look at it as exploratory work right now because and that's always an awkward stage is when you're trying to figure things out and what's right for our community and how is this going to be productive and it's going to work well and what's the council really wanting the DEI to focus on and how they work that out. So I'm calling it exploratory, but I think that this will be a really good workshop to get everybody together and work on the objectives. So I will turn it over to Taylor or Elena, whoever.
Cool. Yeah, I will just go through. You started us off well. I wanted to reiterate that this meeting is an exploratory kind of collaborative conversation. It is not intended to be the DEIC giving a perfectly baked presentation of a perfectly refined tool. It's more so everyone's working together to practice, using this pilot version of this tool. And ultimately the council is who gets to decide what the equity lens looks like. So the DEIC very much needs the council's feedback on this pilot version of the tool. And then, we put what we expect to be the main objectives of this meeting up on the board here. For those of you who maybe can't see, okay, I'm stuck where I am. For those of you, it's okay. For those of you who can't see it, I'm gonna just read them out loud, and this is not in any particular order. But 5 main objectives as we kind of understand them for this meeting are for probably the council to clarify the role of the DEI committee. The council and the DEI committee together brainstorm and establish the purpose of the equity lens. So obviously there's already been some conversation about the purpose of it, but it's a pilot version. It's still in its preliminary phase. Talk through that a little bit. Number 3 is the DEI committee hopefully can describe a little bit about the process of developing and practicing using the equity lens. And then number 4, both the council and DEI committee together will practice applying the lens to an example scenario. And lastly, the council hopefully will be able to give some feedback on the content of the lens and how you think it should be used, so the application. If everyone is okay with that list of objectives, then I think we can probably get started. And I do also just want to recognize that later tonight on the council agenda, you do have some discussion of, you're going to be looking at the specific code language that establishes the responsibilities of the DEI committee. So with that objective number 1 up there, which is clarifying the role of the DEIC, that's more so just kind of a high level general conversation about what the council thinks of as the DEIC's role, not those specific code language bits that we should save till later. So.
Right. So I guess maybe start off with some maybe statements from council as to what they would like to see. Is that what we're looking for at this point? Yes,
I think that would be good if you have questions or to clarify the role. I think just a discussion, maybe if the council doesn't, if you have some comments to start off with, that would be great. And if not, maybe Aaron or somebody could share a little bit about what you've worked on so far and if that is how the council thought this would progress.
Yeah, I think if they gave us kind of an outline of where they're at this point, gave us some, something to work with, and then we, take a look at that and see if there's anything we'd like to add, or maybe have some say in, we'll go from there, so.
Okay. No other comments from the council right now? Okay, I think kind of just as those are in no particular order, I think kind of maybe jump into 3. No, which one was it? Describe how the development application so far of the equity lens might be a good kind of a starting point. And then as ideas pop up, that's one thing we talked about this weekend, is that groups always can make a better decision than just a single person or 1 or 2 people. It takes a little bit of time to get to that, but I think if any of the DEI members want to just share so far how they have developed the equity lens, I think it came from a pretty solid source, and then just how they've applied it so far, that might give some feedback from the council, an opportunity for that.
Yeah, I like that.
So I don't remember all of the history of getting to where we are now with the pilot tool that you all have. I think in looking at the work that was laid out in our original, the code, that in order to begin doing that work, we knew we needed to start with a tool that would help us approach some of these broader topics. Just advising the city of the development of a strategic plan to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion, evaluating the city's progress in equity-related goals, objectives, and action plans, et cetera. So, and reviewing current policies and procedures with an equity lens was one of the pieces in the code of the committee. So establishing the tool was necessary to begin most of our work. And at that time, Taylor was steering the ship and helping us find resources. So, excuse me, we landed on using the Nonprofit Association of Oregon's Equity and Inclusion Lens Guide as our starting point. And feel free to jump in at any time, any of y'all. I think we found it was the best product to begin with. And it's not a product, but the best tool that could easily translate into the purpose that we wanted to use it for. So we made some adjustments to it. I think we took some things out that didn't make sense for us and sort of tailored it to Estacada, and we ended up with the pilot that you all have. What else? Anyone want to?
I just have a question. So I think it's always a little awkward because we know, there's not a lot of attendees here. So I think it makes it more comfortable than when you're like having a conversation in front of a whole bunch of people. But I think just to really realize that this is a circle. And so I think we have to work this out where people can watch and where people can go back and look at this video and see, the things that we're concerned about and that we're talking about. And I know that the DEI requested to have this workshop. And so I kind of be interested in how that came about too. What are you hoping to accomplish? Or how did you envision this happening? And then if there's any other comments from the council, otherwise we could kind of go into practice applying a lens so the council can see how you use that.
Well, I can tell you a little bit more about why we're here. Specifically, I think we shared the pilot equity lens with city council, and we had some feedback from Councilor Strobel. And in our discussions of that, we realized that if we really want this to be a tool that people can broadly use, that we needed to have conversations and come to shared understandings and have that sort of continuous improvement mindset where we can take feedback and incorporate it into the work so it becomes a real living workable tool for the city.
Okay. Councilor, you have a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Thanks. So you were talking about the source in which this came from, and I got a chance to look a little bit into the equity and inclusion lens guide you guys have here. And there's something in there that actually struck me and I took it as racist as a racist statement added inside of this thing here by itself. And I'm going to read it to you guys, and it brings into question as this being the foundation that we built it off of, if things like this are in the guide. There are specific groups or identities who have been historically excluded in an ableist, white, male-dominated heterosexual society that favors urbanism. When you're calling out a specific race, a specific gender, a specific sexuality, anything like that is by itself and basis racist. So when it's something that's inside of the foundation of that is calling it out and brings into question the whole document and its foundation. So it makes it concerning to me, but it says right there, it's calling out a specific race and saying that this is the center of it all. And that really greatly concerns me, is for building an equity lens on that. So I just wanted to see what you guys have to say about that.
I don't have a direct response to that. I know that that's not language that's in the tool that we've presented you with.
Yeah, I have done that. And I read through it, and most of the stuff in here, I don't find a problem with. But, and I do admit, I have not had a chance to get through it all. We had a bad week last week. So most of what I've read is relatively decent, and it seems like more common sense stuff you would approach something with. But you said that this is the foundation you started with. And so my question is, how much of this and what parts did you use of it? So that I and anyone watching this later on, because I'm sure this will be watched because of what the purpose of it is. Can you explain and clarify that? Because I'm sure people are going to go look for this, and now that I brought it up, they're going to look at it more. Will you clarify for the people that are watching this and for the community and for us what you may have taken from this and applied to this one, so that we know things like racist statements and aren't the foundation of what we built an equity lens on?
Can I speak?
Yeah, go ahead, Jerry.
Okay, so that phrase or that statement was not included in our equity lens. So that was one thing that the DEI didn't agree with, and it wasn't included in our equity lens. So there should be no discussion on this, because it's not something that was included in the equity lens in the tool that they proposed. So.
Well, may I counter?
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
So my concern is this one. If that is the foundation that they designed this process on, it brings into question, what is the equity lens or the view that they took when they created the rest of the stuff in the document? That's what I'm talking about, not that particular statement being in our document. I would be shocked if I saw that in there, and I haven't seen it yet. But my question is, based upon that foundation, for what thought, the foundation that you guys used to build this on, I mean, can you see where I'm kind of layering that up? I just want some clarity.
I think I could make a comment about that.
Yeah. please.
I think that I've had a struggle with that. I have a young man who is my son, and I have struggled with that because I thought, what is he going to be? Is he going to be looked at and pushed aside because he's a white male, college educated, rural, heterosexual? I mean, is he going to be pushed aside in the future because of all of that? And it was a kind of a struggle to work through that over the past several years as he's been growing up. But I think that if you look over at the city councilors on the list on the wall over there, most of them are white males. And we're not saying that it's bad for white males to be involved in this. We're not trying to be racist and said no more, where you have to completely change this. But I think that what our equity lens is trying to do is we've done pretty good at bringing women in as a different perspective over the years. I just learned recently that a woman couldn't even get a credit card in her own name until I think it was like the mid 70s. Life has changed dramatically. And there's still other people, whether it's based on socioeconomic things or based on a language barrier or based on access barrier physically, that it's hard for them to attend. There's people that haven't been included. And I think rather than trying to push people out and say, hey, you guys have been running the show for a long time, we want to push you out and replace that, I think what we need to do is like enlarge the circle and bring more people in. And so I think it's a really, really hard conversation, like I said, that I have struggled with. but they left that phrase out, but that is a lot of the basis of where it's coming from. I think that's, if you look at where equity is going for women, for a lot of, that's the one that always comes to mind, I guess, probably because it affects me, but that's where it came from. We don't want to include it. We want to bring more people into the circle. So I don't know if that helps any clarity or not, Councilor Lickey.
Mayor. All right, so a couple things. First of all, the councilors are talking up on there. Are they appointed by the city ordinance or are they elected by the people of Estacada? Because everybody on the council is elected by the people of Estacada.
They're elected.
And it's people that choose to run. So I don't find that as a basis for something in this argument here. The second piece is you're talking about more inclusion on there, and we're all talking about that. So let me ask a few questions then. What ordinances can be defined or found that would be considered to be racist or not equitable? That's one question. Second question is, can you please share with me the dates and the cases that the city has been sued over racist or unequitable situations or ordinances? And I'll save the last one for later if need be, but those two questions, have we ever been sued, or is there any ordinances that have been found? And since the committee's been formed 15 months ago, have we found any ordinances that may be up for debate about that? So.
Yeah, I got a couple of people here. We'll go with Trina over there and then.
Well, so far since we've been formed, the only thing that we've really done is make this equity, and we plagiarized it, most of it. We haven't done a lot. And I'm not sure what our purpose is. You elected us to be on this board, and so far it's been pretty much a waste of time for me. We haven't accomplished anything. We haven't even gone through any of the ordinance to see if there's any racism or discrimination or anything. I highly doubt there is, because I really don't think there's one person on the board that is racist. That's why I find it really weird that you made a DEIC committee. You guys aren't racist. There isn't racist stuff in your ordinance. What are we here for?
I have several thoughts that I'll probably end up bringing up at different points throughout today's meeting, but I wanted to clarify something that Councilor Litkey had brought up, that yes, the straight white men that are on those boards ran and were elected because they had the luxury of being able to. For a long time, women weren't able to run, and even now there are barriers to women running for city council. For example,
What barrier is keeping any woman in Estacada from?
oh, I can go on and on. For example, I am raising children. I have 2 young children at home who I am missing out on time with tonight to be here.
Before this even goes any further,
Anyways.
I'm gonna shut her down right here just
All
for a
right.
second. And I'm gonna say, we didn't come here to beat each other up over
Yeah.
what's right for our
But-
city. What we did is come here so that we could understand. how
I'm,
to
and
implement
I'm
this
trying to
program.
help give
So
him a
I
greater
wanna try to
understanding
do
as
that
to
without
how
us attacking
white
each
women
other.
or women in
Before you keep
general.
talking, can I finish?
Well, can I finish?
In a minute, you may.
All right.
Now, before we go into this, I don't want this to be about this. So there's no reason to fight that, because we're here to find out how this is going to work. And that's what I'm here for. And that's what I hope that Taylor and the rest of the band will help me understand. So once we get through that and we're on that term, then we can sit there and have a discussion, but not an attack, because that's exactly what we don't want to do.
No
Yeah.
one is attacking. He brought up that these white men ran and were elected. And I am bringing up that there are barriers to women running and being elected. And those barriers are why the DEIC was created, is to identify the barriers that exist for different people within our city, whether it's so that they can run for city council, or if it's so that they can attend an event at the library without feeling persecuted when they're doing that. We are here to talk about the barriers that exist for people who have not been handed the luxuries that other people have been handed. That identifying of barriers can be applied really throughout everything we do. Every time that we approve a playground, for example, can that playground design go through the DEIC to identify barriers that might exist for certain kids to play with that playground? If they can identify those barriers early on in the planning stages, then we can address those barriers so that when it's actually executed, those barriers don't exist anymore. That's what it means to be inclusive. It's identifying barriers, identify ways to get around those barriers, and then having a more inclusive community. And we can do that for everything. We can do that when we talk about women who want to run for city council. It is really hard for me to be here tonight because I'm missing out on hours with my children. And every mother would have the same decision that they'd have to make if they wanted to run for city council. How can we bring them into the conversation? How can we make running for city council easier for mothers in our city? Well, we did a really good thing, I think, by going to a hybrid model where we've got Zoom and city council, because that does give me the option of being at home while on the city council meeting if I really needed to exercise that option. Obviously today I thought it was more appropriate for me to be in person, so here I am. That being said, the DEIC is not here to identify who is racist and who is not racist. It is here to identify the barriers that exist in our community for everybody to enjoy everything at its fullest. And that's what I'm really looking forward to talking about today.
There you go.
So if I may, one of the purposes that I think Trina just articulated pretty well, one of the objectives of the meeting is hopefully for the council to identify the role and the purpose of the DEI committee as you all see it. As you know, you have the power to change the code that establishes the committee and assigns the responsibilities to the committee. One of the reasons that the committee, or the reason that the committee is trying to develop this equity lens is because currently the code assigns them to develop and apply an equity lens. If you all decide that that's not something that you want the DEIC to do, that is something you could change in the code. So I think, I don't want to derail anything, but it seems like the bigger question here is, what does the council see as the role of the DEI committee? And you just spoke to that a little bit. Some of you have already spoken to that a little bit. And then the other thing is, just to remind a couple of people, I think race gets so closely attached to conversations about diversity, especially diversity, but also equity and inclusion. But a lot of diversity, equity, and inclusion issues have nothing to do with race and have more to do with people living with disabilities or people with different language barriers, or things that are entirely unrelated. So just to keep that in mind, that it's not, and I think that the group has done a pretty good job of detaching from the race conversation. I mean, not that it's entirely unimportant, but it's not the only thing that they're looking at. So just put those two reminders out there. So if we are able to have some conversation about what does the council see as the DEIC's role and purpose, I think that could be really helpful tonight.
All right. Cool.
So my questions are not meant to be inflammatory. My questions are meant to define the information that we need in order to define and clarify our role at DEIC. In order to understand what we need to do there, we need to clarify what it is our expectations are. And for example, asking about what ordinances or what lawsuits, or clarifying previous information and considerations like that helps us to identify what the rules and things we need them to do. Councillor Dunsmuir was just speaking about challenges to mothers. And so I think it'd be great for the DEIC, because the consideration would be, she failed to consider that fathers also have to equally be away from their children as well. There's barriers to everybody, no matter what. If I'm a heterosexual white male, it doesn't matter. There's barriers to me too. I work jobs, I have families, I have responsibilities outside the home, And so it's to have an equal approach to that, to understand that everybody has barriers. Everybody has ability to run. So that's an equal look at it as it is. We can't knock down all the barriers. And so to charge them with to say, hey, find a way to knock down all our barriers is an impossible task. To say, hey, let's find a position where we can accept this is what things are and there's challenges or there's certain normalcy to the world and say, this is our level, that's fine. We can charge them with that. She was talking about, and I want to point out the second thing is some of the things that she mentioned, we already had considered. She talked about a playground. I brought up a question last year when we were considering a playground up in one of the things. I said, hey, what about our access for people that are disabled? You know, can kids get to it? Do we have ramps? I asked that question. And so we were already asking the question. So if we're already asking those questions, you know, I'm trying to figure out where that level is so we can understand what it is we need them to work on, what we're already doing, and kind of where that balances out. That's my purpose for asking the questions, is to get that clarification so that I can help, in my opinion, in my side, to give that. I don't have that yet. So.
Okay, Katie, and then Paul.
I guess I should have clarified. I meant single mothers in particular, but that's fine. So what I wanted to really bring up though is that the DEIC is meant to act as a filter. And I know that you missed the majority of the DEIC training that we had, but we talked about how if everybody gets a bike, not everybody's going to be able to use the same bike. But if our goal is to give everybody in Estacada a bike, we're going to have to make sure that if everybody's going to use that bike, maybe some of the bikes need to be shorter. Some of the bikes need to be taller. Maybe some of the bikes need to be modified for a wheelchair user, you know, but whatever we need, whatever we do, we can modify our policies. We can modify the way that we design our streets. We can modify the way that we design our city to make sure that when everybody gets a bike, everybody's getting a bike that they can use. That being said, when we talk about policy, when we talk about designing our streets, if we could have a group of people who are tasked with looking at these designs and asking the same questions every time, would this policy, if enacted, create any additional barriers that don't currently exist? If the answer is yes, who are those barriers going to exist for? If you know, if it's not a specific defined group of people, then you know, just there's so many questions that we can ask to really get to the bottom of something. You know, ask the why questions to learn more about an issue and how it's going to actually affect the people when we enact those policies. So really having that filter to go through and say, hey, if we pass this, are we going to be excluding anybody? Are we going to be giving somebody a bike that they can't use? It's nice to have people who give us that level of opinion. And very, very valuable. And honestly, I like the equity lens that they've so far developed. I would like to see more what if questions, or like, you know, really getting down to is this going to present any barriers if passed? If yes, who is it going to exclude? And if they're going to be excluded, how do we get past that? How do we overcome that exclusion?
And then just it popped up on my knee and then.
Oh.
Got something going on with it. Paul?
I think what Councilor Dunsmuir brought up, a lot of great ideas and thoughts about that. I was going to say about the same thing. You'd asked what ordinances, that would be something that I think the DEIC could look at. What ordinances? I think they could look at past ones. I could think, you know, ones that are in action right now, but also when the council comes up with something, ordinance policy, you know, we've got time between the time that we put it on the table and with a second review. Between that time, it could be a time for the DEIC to review and come back with any feedback as well too. Those are some things that I would see them doing. So old ordinances, new ordinances, and then I'm sure you met single parents.
Single parents, yes. Single parents, and especially they have a lot of barriers that exist that people wouldn't even really think about. I mean, who's gonna cook dinner and bathe the kids and all that kind of stuff? It's, yeah.
So I just
Not
want to
just
keep
that.
us on track here time-wise. We're about halfway through our hour, and I've written down 2 things that people have said now that are helping us clarify the council's idea of the role of the DEIC. I have identifying barriers that prevent people from access or fulfilling their success. And then what Paul just said, sorry, Councilor Strobel just said about the DEIC, if the council is coming up with a policy, the DEIC can help to review it. Could we maybe go around and have councilors blurt out any other ideas that they have about that yeah, what are you,
Yeah,
how do
that's a good
you
idea.
imagine the
Let's
role of
start
the
with Charity down
DEIC?
there.
Well, I just have, one of the questions, I was just, something I was just curious on is information gathering. So I was just curious how you guys were going, or if you have a plan on how you're gonna information gather. So if, you know, if you're okay. Gathering information research, number one, our data gathering plan identify specific areas where we may unintentionally limit equity, inclusion. I'm just wondering how you're gonna like if you're just, you know, people are just gonna phone call it in, or if you're just gonna wait for, you know, a report or a complaint or something. I'm just kind of curious as to how that's gonna happen. Because I can see, you know, going over ordinances and stuff like that, that's kind of easy, but I'm just, as far as like in the community, if how information gathering is gonna happen that way.
Yeah, so what you're looking at is page six
yeah.
of the appendix of the Equity Lens pilot. Those appendix pages are you can think about them as worksheets
Okay.
that they would choose to use based on whatever project or proposal or ordinance it is they're reviewing. You know, if the city or the council comes to them and says, hey, we want to build a playground over here. Can you help us apply the equity lens to that project? They're going to come into the appendix and find which worksheet or worksheets applies most directly. If the council says, hey, we want to, you know, survey the community and get feedback on XYZ, they're going to go to the appropriate worksheet for that. So it kind of depends on the specific project or campaign or whatever it is that they would be gathering information for. Yeah, I think that would be on an assignment by assignment basis, probably.
Okay, great. Joel, go ahead.
I have a couple things. I want to start with kind of trying to bring back up the point I was trying to originally.
Well, let's concentrate on
Well,
what you said there.
I get that, and it's going to come to that. I need an answer there for a reason, because I'm trying to get to a point of something that they could do and to bring forward.
We have not identified any specific
Not
ordinance.
those ones, not that one. The point is what I'm trying to say, and using the bike analogy, she said that everybody gets bike, right? We as a city and any government organization out there has limited resources, whether it be time, people, money, something like that. And by having limited resources, by definition of that, you can't reach and solve every problem. How is the DEIC going to weigh out? And I used this analogy during that class, and the answer I was greatly disappointed in with, and I didn't feel I needed to continue that class after his answer because he chose not to answer the question. The question is, with the limited that capacity there, how are we as a body, or in this case, how would the DEIC interpret that, to knowing that there's going to be a percentage, a group somewhere along the way that is going to have to be left out or cannot be met? We can't make a bike for everybody because we're limited. We don't have unlimited resources to build and design and buy a bike for everybody, as this analogy. There's going to be somebody that won't fit for, or people that it's a no way, either don't want a bike, or B, don't have the ability to ride a bike. How are we going to measure that piece out or understand and respond to that? That is something I'd love to see the DEIC come up with, because that's an answer I still don't know about. And I would love to have that to weigh out and understand that when I'm weighing out a decision, to know that somebody's going to be left out. Give me something there that I can use to help weigh that out. That's going to be the most equitable and fair that I can use it on, because, you know, then it's not always going to have the same person do the same things, and how to address that. You give me something like that, that's value. That's something I can use and we all can use. That's something I would charge the role of the DIC with, is something to provide that, because I don't think anyone's come up with that answer yet.
Can you reiterate, sorry, this is helpful, if you can just describe once again, what do you mean if we can provide that? What exactly is it you're saying they should
Some
provide?
sort of process, understanding, definition, a tool or something that we can look at when we're making a decision, to understand that not every decision we make, not every rule we make, I'll use our upcoming sewer plant as a good example here. When we make the decisions on the budget on that, that's going to raise costs in the city for people who pay for the water bill. there is no way that we can fully pay for that thing without raising some cost. But there are people that are on tight budgets and fixed incomes. That's going to affect them. There's people that make a lot of money that it's not going to affect them at all. So what kind of tool can we look at and go, how can we measure that, or how can we address the situation by being the most fair, but understanding that there is a group of people that are going to be left out or are going to be hit with this somehow.
So
You know.
you want the tool to show you who is being left out, or you want the tool to show the range of impacts among the
That could be a
various
range of
groups?
impacts and who's gonna be left out and a way to understand that we're gonna have to be okay with that.
What barriers we're going to, or what groups are going to be marginalized within the process, I guess. would be-
Yeah, and the second half of that is, there was mentioned earlier that how we can get around those barriers, but the understanding we're not gonna be able to get around some of those barriers. In most cases, we aren't going to. And, you know, how are we gonna bring that to the community? How are we gonna accept that as a government organization to be able to accept that and move on and not get stuck on that issue? That's what we need to figure out. So that's all.
I think they got
I
that.
got that, yeah.
That's a tool, yeah. Paul?
I was thinking, just to add on to another idea, then I think the DEIC can give our community confidence to know that the actions of the city are indeed equitable, that we're looking beyond just one way to look at things, but we're having a more broader approach.
Whether you're serving on the DEIC or serving on this board, I want to remind everybody that this was the product of a very large discussion that our entire community was having in June and July of 2020. And in July of 2020, we, as a city council, hosted a listening session where we listened to people who called in and told us what their experience was regarding diversity, equity, and inclusion in our city. And out of that listening session that we had, listening to all of the concerns of the community members, it was decided that it was really appropriate to have a group of people who focused on the DEIC in our city, because there are so many people that have concerns, that expressed their concerns to us directly. And that listening session should still be on our city website, correct? In case anyone wanted to go back and revisit that. Those concerns that were brought up by our citizens during the listening session ranged from anything from the way that schools are handling incidents of racism to potential concerns over demographics of people that were being pulled over by our cops that were, initiated by a cop itself without being a call initiated. Well, I can't remember what the term was, but they showed some concern that the Clackamas County Sheriff's Office was pulling over specifically people of color. So that's one of the reasons why I've started asking the Clackamas County Sheriff's Office for that information, is to be able to show the community whether or not that is or is not happening, because that was a concern that they brought to us in 2020. That being said, we heard from several community members that they feel excluded in our city. And that's not okay to have that many people telling us as a city council that they feel excluded. So it is really important to have a group of people looking at what is making those people feel excluded. And to answer your question, what happens when we find a group of people that we just can't make a bike fit for? The answer that I can give is to try harder, to strive to be better. Just because we're doing really, really good does not mean we can't do better. We can always do better. And so, yeah, as we're going through and the DEIC recognizes that there's a group of people who are going to experience a barrier when it comes to our policies or our designs or whatever, we might not be able to address that concern immediately, but we at least know we have something that we can do better in the future. And maybe the next time a resource comes around, we can say, hey, we've got this extra resource and we've got this, barrier that exists for a group of people that we've already identified, because when we were making the policy or making the design or whatever, the DEIC identified a barrier. And now we have this additional resource to help us overcome that barrier. And we can actually marry the two together so that as a city, we're doing better. We're not going to be perfect, but we can always do better. And I think that the DEIC always trying to help us be better and always help us strive to build that better mousetrap or whatever you want to call it, super valuable. And so for me, I see the DEIC as being a really great opportunity for us as a city to identify, yes, the barriers, but also identify possible solutions as well. I like to use it as a filter. You know, when you've got water that's dirty water and you pour it through a filter, you're going to get rid of the chlorine. But the more filters you add, you can, you know, remove all sorts of different minerals from water. And the more filters you add, the cleaner your water is going to be. So really, the more questions we're asking, or the more questions the DEIC is asking when looking at policy, when looking at designs of playgrounds or city streets or sidewalks, which, by the way, does come up a lot in conversations regarding people with disabilities, you know, sidewalk planning. I think that would be the most valuable way for the DEIC to spend their time, is to act as that sort of filter, identify the barriers so that we can identify solutions. And we might not be able to meet the solutions 100% of the time, but we can at least strive to, and we can do our best to try.
Justin, you got something to add?
I don't have anything to add. No, I think it's all been said for me.
Okay, Jerry.
So this pilot equity lens is a tool that will identify, if it's used properly, it will identify people that are being marginalized or being left out, or using this pilot equity lens, which is a living document. It's going to change. It is just a pilot. This equity lens is a tool that you can use in your day-to-day lives. If you actually read the equity lens, there's a lot of stuff in there that you can use to this equity lens isn't just meant for the DEI committee. This equity lens is meant for all of us, for every committee, for everybody. I mean, if there's things in this equity lens that you could use to just making personal decisions in your regular daily life. But just this equity lens is the tool that Councilor Litkey was asking for, that will identify those people that are being marginalized, that will identify if there's going to be someone that is going to be marginalized on any decision that we make. And we can use that to, you know, kind of focus to bring them back into that circle. You know, we can identify if any, you know, using this tool, we can identify those people that are being left out and figure out a way to bring them back into the circle so that we don't have that issue, so that we can make a bike for everybody. You know, just you know, it's a great tool. It's an amazing start. I really like the direction that it went, and the stuff that was left out of that original document. So yeah, thank you.
Okay, Taylor.
Thank you. I think I heard from everybody, unless Councillor Hughes, if you want to add, I think you more asked a question.
No, I mean, I thank you guys for coming tonight. I know it's really hard to like come up here and sit before the council, and it's almost like a firing squad. So I appreciate you guys coming out tonight. Thanks, Councillor Tenbush, for reminding us, you know, that, yeah, it is a living document. It is going to change as we kind of poke and prod through this a little bit more. We can dissect the language a little bit better. I understand Councillor Litkey's concerns over, you know, using language that's, you know, sounds very exclusive and can be sort of like hypocritical. But yeah, I just appreciate you guys coming out. I don't want you to feel like it is a waste of time, what you're doing. As Councillor Dunsmuir has pointed out, that anytime you get involved in anything political or committee-wise, it's like you have a vision and you want to see these things done in anything government's just, you know, quadruple the time. It's just going to take time. And it's a new committee. You know, we're looking at public safety committee possibly in the future. They're going to run into the same struggles. It's going to be like, how do we get this thing rolling? So yeah, I mean, I know this was more of a roundtable listening session, so I don't really have a whole lot to add. But I do appreciate you guys coming out tonight, so.
Yeah, and Taylor, what I want to make clear here too is I don't want us to have to rush through this. I would like us to have the time for you to explain this equity lens and everything on that so that I understand better and so I can be a better, steward of this going forward. So I would like us to plan another one of these workshops to go over this. I don't want to have to crunch it in the next 15 minutes because it's very important. It's important to our city. It's important to us. So I would like us to consider another workshop to finish the equity lens and everything that she's got on there, because that's a lot to go through, and I don't think we're going to be able to do it. That way we can have a clear idea of what's happening, and it gives you the time you need. Does
Yeah.
that sound like something you'd be okay with?
Yeah, and the last question that I think I have for the council is, would you all prefer to generate the questions that make up the equity lens? Would it feel a lot more like, would you have more I'm imagining you would have more buy-in if you yourselves are choosing the questions that go into the equity lens rather than we pull together some questions and have you.
I'm comfortable with, I would like the people to have a say in that. It's not about just what we think up here. I want it to be fair to everyone. So you have something you want to add?
I was just going to say that I think the best way to start learning the tool and how it works would be to practice applying it to something. So none of us are experts on it either. We're just working on creating something we think will be helpful. And I think if we can take a process either in postmortem, which is what they call like after we've done something, we can look back at the housing needs analysis, or we can look forward to the Main Street project or something else where we're considering broad impact, and sort of just really casually like look at some of these questions in that category and just see how it influences the way we think about it and if it is helpful.
Yeah, I like that. That works. Trina, did you want to add something in
I think I would feel more better about it if like the council would assign us like the ADA ramps for the streets. That's a complete mess, but it feels like we need something, give us a project, have us look at what Main Street, what are you doing on that? And have us go through something like, do you see any barriers for whatever? Give us a specific project. I think that it feels like we're lost, and I think if we were tasked more with something, then I would feel like we're accomplishing something and we're actually doing something besides coming up with equity lenses.
Sure, I get you.
You
Well, yeah, that's a good idea. And Joel, before I give you this question, hold on. Let's keep it civil. Let's keep it direct. Let's give these guys an opportunity to present. And if you can do that, then great, go with this question.
Real quick, first of all, I know my questions are harsh and direct, but I'm trying to find that piece there that I think a lot of people are asking the question to. And so we can identify that. I think it helps not just us, but the community understand as well. But something, first of all, is I think before we apply it, we should consider maybe making this a public input session, because it's for them, right? It's for the rest of the public. So why not get an input onto what they think about this? And then after they have their input and the DEIC's had a chance to take that in, make the adjustments, then apply it to something, apply it to an ordinance or something like that. And, or, we have the 4th of July parade coming up around the corner. Lots of things involved around that. Maybe they can look at how that's being run, since it's being run by the DEC. Thank you. There's too many DEIs and this and that, but it's being run by the commission. Why don't we have them look at that and see what kind of access we make sure we have for those who are disabled, language barriers, inclusivity of, all those. I think we're going to have grand marshals from every volunteer group in the city, making sure that's fully included, things like that. They can look at, make sure we're having a good round robin on that one. And it's something small to start on, but there's something we do every year. But yet also it gives them time to have some input from the community and rework it before they take a look at that, because that's in July. It gives us a few months. So
So that would be gathering, I just want to make sure I'm understanding, this, gathering public input about what questions or what considerations does the public want to make sure the council and the city is asking and thinking about in planning all
Yeah.
these various,
What are the thoughts about this? Is there something missed on
about
there?
this specific.
The lens, what are the thoughts about it? Did they miss something? Should we reconsider something in there? You know, it's for them. Do they have questions about what's in there? How it's in there? You know, did they review that no one else has thought about? We're a small group of people, but maybe there's someone who has in this situation that they can bring in and specifically identify before we put this to the test the first round. Let's give the community a chance to input on it.
Before I go any further.
What do I think?
Yeah,
Oh,
I
I
wanna
think
hear
you
your
all
opinion.
should do what you.
I will say,
to do.
doing the event planning group. Okay.
What number is that?
9.
Number 10, whoever's number 10.
hot tonight.
Doing the event planning for the 4th of July parade, I know it seems like that's a long ways away, but you need a lot of lead time for that. And so if you were going to task the DEI committee to look at the event planning, they need to do it now. It would be too late to do it in July, unless you're looking at it as a postmortem, we've already planned the event, it's already occurred. You look at last year's event, what was the impacts? If that's the way you want to do it. I'm just saying
Actually,
from a
postmortem's not a
timeline.
bad idea.
Okay, okay.
I can't hear Sean.
Is that
Your
mic's
mic's
off?
Turned off.
Is-
Can you hear it now, Jerry?
Maybe you all can gather on one mic.
Just pass it. I just want to reiterate that this is not a tool that's being created only for the use of the DEIC, that it is a tool that we are hoping to create that will be utilized in any decision-making or planning or policy that is happening at the committee or city level. And I think, speaking for the group, that I think we created this and we hoped that we would have a tool that we collaboratively landed on. So I like the idea of us working together to practice. I mean, it doesn't have to be a real scenario, but if we can do that, we can sort of see if we're heading in the right direction before we start gathering a whole lot of additional input.
Yeah. And I think that kind of falls in line with that. So I would say that's a good idea. Let's see, would you like to have the workshop after that or before that? That we can actually come together and talk about some of these other things, because we're getting to the point now.
I think that's up to, well,
Yeah,
that might be
that-
up to the city manager. I was going to
Oh,
say, I think that's up to
So
you.
how can we schedule this in? Because I know you guys have a lot going on.
Can we look at the calendars of
Right.
things and get back to you about
Mhm.
that scheduling?
And we could look at doing some kind of public outreach, because that's one thing I was going to share too, because it used to be, you just made the information available and people knew where they needed to look in the newspaper or look on the website. Now it's not just, we don't want to just make something available. We want to engage the community. And this could be a good practice. And how do we engage the community in getting feedback on this? And that's just one example of kind of a change. And another, like the ADA ramps out there are the result of a lawsuit, which it's better to be proactive, I think, about something than to have a lawsuit and then have just massive change. Even though they're trying to do it for the better, it's happening kind of fast. And but it's because of a lawsuit. So we haven't had a lawsuit to answer that, but yeah, I think getting more community engagement around this topic, and I will stop because Councilor Dunsmere wants to say something.
We did host a listening session about
Mhm.
2 years ago in July. Would it be beneficial for the DEIC to host their own listening session and maybe present this document to the greater public before
Mhm.
the listening session, so that when people go to the listening session for the DEIC, the way that they did 2 years ago to the city council, that they have not only an opportunity to express any concerns that they have about DEI in our city, but also to express any questions or concerns that they have about the document that they have access to before the meeting starts. I mean, the listening session that we held in 2020 was very fruitful. There were a lot of concerns brought up that I had not previously heard in the past. And I think that a listening session was a really appropriate way for us to hear those concerns. So if it would be appropriate, I think that it would be also appropriate for DEIC to hear those
host one
concerns
of
directly
those.
from the community members themselves.
That's a great idea. We've been here, what, 15 months now? I don't recall a single set-in visitor where someone from the public has come in to set in on one of our meetings. And I don't know about the Zoom because obviously I don't know how many community members have come in on Zoom, but how are we going to get more than 2 people to show up? That's my fear, is we have the listening session and nobody shows up. Well, if we have that listening session and nobody shows up, what does that tell the city council? I mean, it's kind of an honest question.
That's a good point. I mean, but I think it wouldn't hurt to put that out there and try to engage the community to see, who's, because actually I think that I know that we're not perfect, but I also think that there's a lot of, we're talking about hopefully just making minor changes of direction or perspective, or, and some things will probably be more major, but we just, we're not saying that this is a huge problem in our community, but there are some things that we need to get better at. And so I don't know if you want to have them take a look at doing a listening session and then come back and do a hot wash after the 4th of July parade to see how that went and how people were included. Potentially.
I think that would be a good way to approach this and going forward. And now that we're getting close to the hour, I'm gonna have to shut this down.
Yeah, we're out of
At the
time.
same time, I want to give you a last statement, Taylor, before we head out. Is there anything you'd like to finish up with?
I really appreciate all of your thoughtful input, and there's a lot of really smart people in this room and on this Zoom, and I'm very grateful for all of your kind of brainstorming towards solutions. So yeah, just appreciation. Thanks.
Yes, thank you, everybody.
Thank you. All right, and we'll get back to you at a later time and have this set up. So we thank you all. I'll give us a few minutes before the council meetings, and I'm going to adjourn this.
Thank you.